When doing the upside down drawing, I think one of the important things for students to grasp is why we even practice drawing something upside down. So to begin the lesson, I would just find an image of any Mayan glyph. This is of a jaguar, and I just printed it out on a piece of paper. And so I could show the students this and ask them what it looks like a glyph of, and they could say, a jaguar or whatever other animal it looks like to them. And we could talk about the lines and the shapes that we see as far as oils. And then I could turn it upside down and say, all right, now what are the different lines and shapes that you see? And of course, it's exactly the same lines and shapes. It's still curves and dots and circles and things like that. So what we want the students to realize is that we don't necessarily draw a picture of an animal. We draw the lines and the shapes that we see. And it's important to recognize that so that we're not drawing from what we think we see inside of our head, our own image of a jaguar, but we're exactly copying things as they are. And that's the point of doing this exercise. When I set up my board, I use a file folder like this because it's nice and thick and you cannot see the image through this. But even using a piece of black paper to cover your upside down image would work. And I would have this already taped up on my board ready to go before class begins. For older students, you can just pass out plain white paper and they would begin drawing once you pull up the first section of the image. So there's dotted lines on the picture. So as I pull it up, I would stop at that first set of dotted lines and my students would then begin to draw what they see on their white paper. If I had younger students like 4, 5, 6-year-olds, I could take their paper and already have pre-drawn lines that are halfway and then a quarter here and here, so that way when they draw, they have an easier structure to follow because this first dotted line corresponds to the line that you could draw on their paper. After you pull up this first section to the dotted line, then your students would begin to study the different oils, the different lines and shapes they see, and then copy it by themselves on their own paper while you walk around. There's a few things that you want your students to be able to do though as they study and copy, and one of those things is to understand the size relationships of one piece to another. So this is called proportion, the ratio of one size to another. And this is something that we have to do accurately as we draw, and we get better at the more we practice it. So for example, if I wanted to first draw this line, I would think about how far over from the side does it start? And I would see that there's a pretty big gap. If I was working with older students, I could say it's about 1/3 of the way over. For younger students, I could say, oh, it's about 3 fingers over and kind of measure that with my hand. So I would go to that correct place on my paper and then study the line and see what it does. So it curves up, down, and stops at the line. It curves up and over and comes to a point, curves down, like that. Now I want to look at these dots. How big are these dots in relation to one another? It's about the same size, a 1-to-1 ratio. Is this dot bigger or smaller than this shape that I've already drawn? It's smaller. So in that way I can start comparing one piece, the size of that one piece to the size of the other things I've already drawn. So I would go now and say, this dot is not directly above this little hill, but a little bit to the side. And then this next dot is the same size, but up a little bit higher. So I want to just start to be able to talk about how one piece relates to other pieces around it. So your students will be drawing all by themselves as you walk around and help them. And then after all the students get that first section done, you would be able to go through, pull it up to the next dotted line, and have them continue this drawing in this next section there. And obviously they might begin to see what it is, but we don't want to think about it as an image of an animal or a thing. We want to think about it as the oils and the things that we see. But one fun thing to ask as you go is what they guess that they're drawing. And I'm guessing that their guesses will be very different from what the actual glyph means.